Hey everybody, welcome back for another day of set reviews for Magic Core Set 2019 on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and today we're going to go through all of the black cards from, of course, a limited perspective, talking about draft and sealed, nothing else. Don't yell at me. Of course, these are my first opinions on these cards. They're how I'm going to be approaching the cards when I sit down for my first pre-release and for my first few drafts. May change over time, we'll see. And of course, these are my opinions. I want to hear your opinions down in the comments below. Talk with me, talk with each other. But let's get on into the first card. Up first is Abnormal Endurance. Abnormal Endurance is 1 and a black for an instant at common. Until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. Well, I guess Supernatural Stamina was just too good or something. This is literally Supernatural Stamina, but it costs 1 more mana. It's probably still just a totally fine combat trick, even at 2 mana, and you'll play it when you can, and you'll cut it when you need to. I think it's an easy... I think it can actually be a C, whereas combat tricks are quite often C-. This one works outside of combat a little bit more, just because it would stop any sort of destroy removal as well. So I'd be okay with an Abnormal Endurance in my deck as often as I have a spot for, we'll say. So C for Abnormal Endurance. Up next is Blood Divination. Blood Divination is clearly a playtest name that stuck. Blood Divination is 3 and a black for a sorcery at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 3 cards. There's obviously the black-red Active Treason Sacrifice deck that I'm going to talk about quite a bit, because there's a fair number of cards for it, and this will work very well in it, whether you are sacking a creature that you stole from your opponent, or just sacrificing a goblin that's no longer useful. Paying that +4 mana to draw 3 cards is totally fine. It is a real cost with that much mana in the creature, but I think it is going to be a solid C. Primarily because I don't know if it's going to reach upwards to the skies of C+, or kind of fall down to like a C-. So C for Blood Divination. Up next is Bog Stomper. Bog Stomper is 4 black for a creature beast at common. It's a 6/5, and that's all it's doing. Otherwise, it's completely vanilla. Spoiler alert, Colossal Dreadmaw's in the set. Of course it is. It's in every set. I'm not going to play a strictly worse version of it. This is literally Colossal Dreadmaw with 1 less toughness and no trample in black. Cut this 99% of the time. I've got it at a D+. This goes in your deck when things didn't quite go well. D+ for Bog Stomper. Up next is Bone Dragon. Bone Dragon is ready. 3 black for a creature dragon skeleton at Mythic. It's a 5/4 flyer. 3 black, exile 7 other cards from your graveyard. Return Bone Dragon from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I do love graveyard to battlefield. Bone Dragon seems fantastic. It's a 5/4 flyer for 5, which is just gonna end games. It's like a beefier Sarah Angel at that point. The return clause isn't quite as good as it sounds. What am I doing with graveyard cards? Why would I not just want to throw these away and bring back my Bone Dragon 2, 3, 4, 5 times? Well, you're not gonna, because it requires 8 cards to be in your graveyard, 7 plus Bone Dragon. And while everyone always thinks about having a super stacked graveyard and games dragging on for 27 turns, that just doesn't actually happen that often in Limited. Limited games that go until turn 10 are typically kinda rare, and by turn 10 you'll have seen 17 cards on the draw, and if a representative 42.5% of those are lands, then you have 7 lands on the table, which don't make it to the graveyard. So that leaves 10 cards, of which you would need all but 2 to have made it to the graveyard, which probably means things are not going very well for you at all. Getting back the dragon will be nice there, where 8 of your 10 cards have made it to the graveyard, but things have clearly gone south, and it probably just will not save you. So don't get too stoked on that return ability. Yes, you could throw in some self-mill to try to help it along, but you're just not going to be returning Bone Dragon probably ever more than once, and I think even that one time is going to be a little bit rough. But it's a 5/4 flyer for 5. It is great. It is a snap first pick. It is really good. I've got it at an A-. If you get to return it, it's going to be solid. I wouldn't go out of your way to return it, and I wouldn't get into any sort of mindset that this is going to be coming back and back and back and back again. A- for Bone Dragon. Up next is Child of Night. Child of Night is 1 and a black for a creature vampire at common. It's a 2/1 lifelink. I love Child of Night. I always have. It's a great core set card. It's a piker with lifelink, which is a piker that I like. Nice and aggressive. It'll give you a nice life buffer in the aggro mirror. You play this on turn 2 and you get in for maybe 2-4, and suddenly you've got an 8-point life swing there. Mid-pack pick at the earliest, of course, but I'm happy to play these most of the time. So C+ for Child of Night. Up next is Death Baron. Death Baron is 1 black for a creature zombie wizard at rare. It's a 2/2. Skeletons you control and other zombies you control get +1/+1 and have Death Touch. You can't do it in this set, but if you made it a skeleton, it would pump itself. Yeah, Death Baron seems good if you can obviously load up on zombies, and obviously zombies is a theme of the black deck or the black cards in Core Set 2019. It's a build around. It is really underpowered though if you don't get there. Unfortunately, being rare, you're very unlikely to be stacking these in limited. You know, we're not going to have those situations of having a Merfolk Mistbinder or 3 in your deck. You're going to have one of these. Plus, Death Touch is a defensive ability, so why pump and give Death Touch? It's not a downside, it's just not something I terribly want to pay extra for, but I'm not terribly sure how easy this whole zombie thing is going to be to come together. So there are zombies. We'll talk about, I believe, at least 6? Maybe 7 different zombies, plus some cards that make zombies. But this is the only card, other than one other one that we'll talk about, a big one, that actually cares about zombies. So I'm not exactly sure what the zombie deck looks like, and I think the only way you get into it is by pack 1, pick 1ing a Death Baron. So we'll have to see how it works out. As we'll talk about, a lot of the common zombies that you'll actually be able to get your hands on aren't the best, and some of the better zombies literally every black player is going to want. So I'm tempted to pull the trigger on the zombie deck isn't quite real, which I did before in Amonkhet and it was real. We'll see. Death Baron is a B- if you do have a ton of zombies. Otherwise, it's an overcosted 2/2, so D- in those cases. So this will be a big question for me. Does mono black zombies or mono-ish black zombies exist? I'm not sold on it just yet. Up next is Demon of Catastrophes. Demon of Catastrophes is 2 black for a creature demon at rare. It's a 6/6 flying trample for 4. As an additional cost to cast it, you do need to sacrifice a creature. It's a 6/6 flying trample for 4. Sack anything, and it's almost guaranteed to be an upgrade. Maybe don't sack your Gigantosaur, but this still ends the game faster than a Gigantosaurus does. Yeah, this is great. This is first pick every pack. This is a very, very, very good card. You play your Doomed Dissenter or your Diagraph Ghoul, or you play literally anything that's worse than a 6/6 Flample, sack it, and turn 4 you get yourself this thing. No downside as soon as it's on the battlefield. Fantastic card, just a flat out solid A. Honestly, probably just an A+ in the way that it's just going to end games, but I don't typically give an A+ to something that doesn't do something the second it hits the battlefield. So A for Demon of Catastrophes. Up next is Diagraph Ghoul. Diagraph Ghoul is a single black mana for a creature zombie at uncommon. It's a 2/2, but it does enter the battlefield tapped. But it doesn't have haste, so you weren't attacking with it anyways, so it literally is not a downside. The only downside is if your opponent plays a 1-drop hasty creature, you don't have a blocker. That's not a common scenario. Diagraph Ghoul is just super solid. It might look unassuming, but attacking for 2 on turn 2 is powerful. Not a first pick unless the pack is awful, but a strong include in black. I'd play as many as I can get in every single black deck, and obviously if you did get yourself a Death Baron, well, here's a zombie. Unfortunately, it's a zombie that there's going to be about 1 of in every draft, and every single black player should be picking it. So C+ for Diagraph Ghoul. Up next is Doomed Dissenter. Doomed Dissenter is 1 and a black for a creature human at common. It's a 1/1. When Doomed Dissenter dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Well, here's another zombie card. But again, Zombies don't matter for this card, it just happens to make a zombie. 1/1 for 2 isn't the best. This is obviously similar to Doomed Traveler, which made a 1/1 Flying Spirit, which I think is just infinitely better. It was 1 mana plus the token Flew. This is probably just okay. It was fairly fillerish in Amonkhet, even in the zombie deck. You didn't necessarily wanted these guys. These were the common filler that you just sort of had to play. So I don't think you actually play this in many black decks. If you do have Demon of Catastrophes, if you do have sack outlets, it goes up. And of course, if you do have zombies, it goes up slightly. But again, the payoff, the huge payoff for being in that zombies deck is your zombies have 1 more power and toughness. That's not that great. So ultimately, Doom Dissenter is like, I think just a C-. If you are in the sacrifice deck, especially with like a Demon of Catastrophes, it might go upwards of a C+, but that still feels strong. So C- for Doom Dissenter. Up next is Duress. Duress is a single black mana for a sorcery at common. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. That player discards that card. I don't really like these effects, period, in Limited. They're a little bit better in Sealed than they are in Draft. And I guess actually we should maybe slightly talk about Arena Draft a little bit at times. Because of course Arena Quick Draft is best of 1 matches. They do have best of 3 matches now, but Quick Draft is best of 1. And I think Duress is very playable in best of 1, just because you need to play cards, it's super cheap, and you'll get something. You'll get a hit. And that hit may be the percentage point you need to win that best of 1 match. But in an actual real paper draft or paper sealed of Duress, Core Set 19, I don't know that I'd super want to play Duress. Doesn't hit creatures. Creatures really are the be-all and end-all of Limited. It's gonna whiff a lot of the times, and if it doesn't whiff, you frequently hit a combat trick or something that doesn't terribly matter. So I'm just not sold on Duress. I cut this very regularly. I try to just never play it. If I'm up against a really, really tough Planeswalker or something, I might side it in. So D for Duress. Epicure of Blood is up next. Epicure of Blood is 4 and a black for a creature, vampire at common. It's a 4/4. It sort of looks like it's flying. I guess all that complaining I did about floating cloaks meaning flying in Dominaria art apparently translated over here, but this one doesn't fly despite having a billowing cloak. Anyways, whenever you gain a life, each opponent loses 1 life. Yeah, this is fine if you are in that Life Gain Matters deck, and explicitly if you have repeatable life gain, and we'll talk about some repeatable life gain in this review, let alone when we get into a couple of other colors. That being said, this is expensive. This isn't Blood Artist. You're not getting this down super early, but it is a 4/4, which can do some damage as well. So ultimately, I think this is probably totally fine and wanted in the Life Gain Matters deck, but you do want to have that repeatable life gain. If you're playing that stupid white card that gains 3 life and you trigger this once, it just didn't really get there, and you're just playing a big dumb kind of 4/4. So I'm not super sold on it being a high pick at all. I think it goes into a pretty narrow deck as well. So I've got it at like C+ feels slightly strong, but let's go C+ if you are in that life gain deck with repeatable life gain. If you're not, this is super cuttable as a C-. It's just a big dumb 4/4 that may or may not even trigger depending on what kind of life gain you've got. So C+, C- for Epicure of Blood. Fell Spectre is up next. Fell Spectre is 3 and a black for a creature Spectre at uncommon. It's a 1/3 flyer. When Fell Spectre enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. So blue-black has sort of a discard deck going on. There's not a massive amount of support for it, but it is, as we'll see in the gold set review, the uncommon card's ability. And the uncommons, of course, even though I really am not a huge fan of them doing this, basically tell you the deck that you're allowed to draft for that color. and the blue-black one tells you that you should be drafting discard. So obviously if you load up on discard spells and you have a Fell Spectre on the battlefield, and oh boy if you have 2, but it's non-common so you should only ever really expect 1, you'll make them lose life. But the whole problem that I have with the discard deck is your opponent can play out their hand. And then the entire point of your deck stops working. Now you did make them play out their hand. They're in top deck mode. That's a great place for them to be. You forced them to be there. But if your plan is, haha, I'm going to make them discard themselves to death, they have a way of stopping that. So I'm not super sold on the blue-black discard deck. I'm hoping there is just a blue-black control deck that works, and maybe it happens to have a bit of discard in it. Now, that being said, for this card specifically, it's a 1/3 flyer for 4. I'm not a big fan of playing them for 2, let alone playing them for 4. It does make your opponent discard a card. That's cool, I guess. I don't know. I'm not super sold on Fell Spectre. If you can get a couple of them and then, sure, start playing your duresses and such, maybe it'll be fine. Maybe at like a C+, I guess. But realistically, I think Fell Spectre's a D, and I'm not super sold on that blue-black discard deck being a thing. Up next is Fraying Omnipotence. Fraying Omnipotence is 3 black for a sorcery at rare. Each player loses half their life, then discards half the cards in their hand, then sacrifices half the creature they control, round up each time. Player, you are included in this. No, just no. If you're out of cards and your opponent isn't, you're up. And if you have no board and your opponent does, you're up there as well. And finally, if your opponent has way more life than you do, you're up there as well. But you know what I just described? A game where you are super dead and this is not going to save you. This will just make it happen faster. This card's awful. Never, ever, ever play it. F- for Fraying Omnipotence. Remember, that says player, not opponent. F-. Gravedigger is up next. Gravedigger is 3 and a black for a creature zombie at uncommon. It's a 2/2. When Gravedigger enters the battlefield, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Look, it's another zombie for the zombie deck. Except it's super good, and every single black deck should draft this. So if you're the zombie deck, don't expect to just get this passed to you. So if you guys watch my other set reviews, you probably know I usually don't like this effect. I don't like returning a card from my graveyard to my hand, but that's always in relation to it being on a spell. When it's attached to a creature that I can recur if I have another one of these and bring this one back and then recast it, is really, really, really good. It's really powerful to leave behind a 2/2 body and have this effect. Gravedigger's a high pick. It's an auto include in every single black deck ever. You should just always pick and play Gravedigger. I'd be happy picking this in the first few picks once removal's gone and bombs are gone. B- for Gravedigger. Up next is Graveyard Marshal. Graveyard Marshal is black for a creature zombie soldier at rare. It's a 3/2. Pay 2 and a black, exile a creature card from your graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. Aha, another zombie, and it makes zombies. It's rare though, so don't ever expect to have it. It's good though. It's definitely pretty darn solid. The value it generates isn't ludicrous. Each creature dying draws you a 3-mana 2/2 basically, which is not something to scoff at. The question is, are those 2/2s going to do anything? They'll obviously be outclassed later in the game. Can you make enough of them to just go wide with them? Odds are, with some removal backing it up, yeah, probably. Of course, this with the Zombie Lord gets amazing, but they're both rares. It's just not going to happen that often. I'll start first picking this card, though, and building around it, just like I will start first picking the Death Baron, just because I want to see if I'm right or not on it not being a deck. But at least the upside with Graveyard Marshal is that it doesn't have to be the zombie deck. You don't have to exile zombies to make zombies. You exile any creatures, and your deck's going to have creatures. So I think Graveyard Marshal is actually just a flat-out B, whereas Death Baron is obviously a very build-around card. So B for Graveyard Marshal. Up next is Hired Blade. Hired Blade is 2 and a black for a creature human assassin at common. It's a 3/2 with flash. 3/2 with flash is pretty cool. So 3/2s for 3, I always talk about how I like them more than 2/3s for 3 because they attack better. But I always want them to have something, some sort of ability, some sort of ETB trigger. One of the best ones I can think of in recent history was the Aetherborn that had Menace. 3/2 for 3 with Menace was pretty good. We'll actually see a 3/2 for 3 with Menace in a later set as well. Flash is actually really cool because this secretly is like Reevesoul. This says pay 3 mana, kill target attacking creature with 3 toughness, and that's actually really good. This should work like removal frequently, and I think some people might miss that on kind of their first draft or their first pre-release or so. Don't think, aha, I can flash this in at the end of turn and have a 3/2 on the board. This is removal. It's secret removal. I actually really like Hired Blade. I think it should be a relatively high pick. Obviously, it doesn't kill huge things. It might if it double blocks with a friend, but I'm going to actually put Hired Blade at a B-. I actually think it's pretty solid, and I'm going to start picking them relatively highly, and I think I'd probably play every one I can get my hands on. Obviously, it has the downside of it needing to be in combat to act as removal, but combat's going to happen. So B- for Hired Blade. That's kind of my long shot optimistic pick of the set. Up next is Infectious Horror. This guy's having a bad day. 3 and a black for a creature zombie horror at common. It's a 2/2. Whenever Infectious Horror attacks, each opponent loses 2 life. So it attacks kind of like a 4/2, I guess, but 2 of that is unblockable. This is fine. This is just totally fine. If you're in an aggressive black deck, this is going to get through some guaranteed damage and maybe some more damage. Your opponent's going to kind of scoff a little bit at wasting removal on a 2/2, but they may just have to. And again, it's a zombie that I think almost every black deck wants. I don't think I would play this in a really hard blue-black control deck, but yeah. Most people are going to want Infectious Horror. That being said, I don't think Infectious Horror is amazing or anything. I don't think it's a super high pick, but by the time you're in the middle of mid-pack, I think it's a fine pickup if you're in black. I think it's kind of like an all-around, I think C, just because it is 4 mana for 2 toughness, you will lose this to a shock or something. So let's go with C for Infectious Horror. Up next is Infernal Reckoning. Infernal Reckoning is a single black mana for an instant at rare. Exile target colorless creature. You gain life equal to its power. I will spoil a set review from a few days from now and tell you that there are 7 colorless creatures in this set, and none of them demand removal. This card is awful. This card is not a card that you want to see in your rare slot, and of course it's a core set, which means there's a fair number of these rares, and of course I'm going to open 17 copies of them. This is just an F-. There's literal 0 reason for you to ever main deck this, and I would argue there's literal 0 reason to ever side this in. The colorless creatures are your typical colorless creatures. 2/1s for 2 walls, 1/1 Thopters. Just no, don't play this card. Straight F-. Up next is Infernal Scarring. Infernal Scarring is 1 and a black for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has, when this creature dies, draw a card. Not a fan of this. I don't like this aura. It doesn't replace itself until the creature dies. If the creature dies in response to you casting this, you get nothing. Good day, sir. If it's bounced, you get nothing. Just too many blowouts here. Unplayable, and I'll lose to it once when I fail to even play Magic. You know, when I play a land and then pass the turn for 7 turns in a row, and this on a 2/2 hits me for 4 or 5 times, and people will say, see, it's good. But it's not. I've got this at a D-. This is just not the kind of aura that I like to play at all. Up next is Isareth the Awakener. Isareth the Awakener is 1 black for a legendary creature human wizard at rare. She's a 3/3 with Death Touch. Whenever Isareth the Awakener attacks, you may pay X. When you do, return target creature card with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield with a corpse counter on it. If that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. This is really good. This is really good. It's a 3/3 Death Toucher, which is fine. You know me, I like my Death Touchers to be 1/1s for 1. I don't need any extra power, just needed to kill the one thing. But giving creatures flashback when she attacks is insane. This seems like an easy first pick. I don't think it's quite in the 100% bomb territory because she doesn't do anything on her own. She has to have creatures in the yard, but if this attacks a few times and gets some creatures back, it's going to be insane. I've got Isareth at a solid B+. I think she's great. A- probably could even be in the discussion. I do try to keep the A range for cards that are just amazing on their own. She does require creatures in the yard. That's not much of a requirement. So B+ for Isareth the Awakener. Up next is Lich's Caress. Lich's Caress is 3 black for a sorcery at common. Destroy target creature. You gain 3 life. Yep, it's unconditional removal. It's not instant speed. That's a hit. It does cost 5 mana. That's a hit. So we're going to knock this all the way down to B. This is just a first pickable card in many packs. If there's not a bomb in the pack, you take Lich's Caress. Sure, it's not Impale. Sure, it's not Murder, which is in the set, but it's going to be totally fine. So B for Lich's Caress. Kill them creatures. Up next is Liliana, Untouched by Death. Liliana, Untouched by Death is 2 black for a legendary planeswalker Liliana at Mythic. She starts with 4 loyalty counters. For her +1 ability, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. If at least one of them is a zombie card, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of zombies you control. -3, you may cast zombie cards from your graveyard this turn. This Liliana is bad. She's actually not very good at all in this limited format unless you explicitly are in that zombies deck that I don't know exists. If you get a Liliana and a Graveyard Marshal and a Death Baron, you should be going out and buying a lottery ticket because that's a mythic and 2 rares. You're just super unlikely to ever get that combo together in a draft. As we talked about, Gravedigger and Diagraph Ghoul, every black deck wants those. You're not guaranteed to get past those just because you have the Zombie Walker. I don't really think I like this Liliana card unless you are explicitly in the Zombies deck. You can first pick it and try to go really deep into it, but you got to get there. Otherwise, you can't play her. Her +1 mills yourself, and if you don't have enough zombies, it literally just mills you for 3. Doesn't do anything else. Her -2 literally does nothing if you don't have zombies. Her -3 literally does nothing if you don't have zombies. I'm not interested in playing a card that literally does nothing unless I'm in a super specific deck that I'm not sure exists and only exists in a single color. You don't even get any support from the other colors. So Liliana, competitively, I don't think is a legitimate pick. That being said, if we see her, of course I'll pick her and try to get into that zombie deck, pack 1, pick 1. But I think anywhere that I'm not drafting for value, I'm going to pass her every time. So Liliana, probably just like a straight B+ if you are flush with zombies. But I think realistically, she's an F. I think this is an F planeswalker in a lot of limited situations. So, sorry, Lily. Let's go on to Liliana's Contract. Liliana's Contract is 3 black for an enchantment at rare. When Liliana's Contract enters the battlefield, you draw 4 cards and you lose 4 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more demons with different names, you win the game. I love alternate win conditions. If I could spoil a card for a set, man, I would love for it to be an alternate win condition card. Unfortunately, there's only 1 demon in this set, and it's only got 1 name. So the alternate win part is absolutely flavor text. You cannot win a game of M19 Limited with this second ability. So the only ability we care about is the first ability, which is draw 4 and lose 4 life, which is probably fine. At 5 mana, it's a little bit costly, but, you know, turn 5 is a great time for me to draw 5 or 4 cards, I think. Unfortunately, it is, of course, dead if you are low on life. If you're at 4 life, it is literally dead. And even if you're at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10, I'd feel a little worried about dropping 4 life all of a sudden. So unfortunately, I don't think this is going to be a massively high grade. I think a really hard blue-black control deck would probably like to have this at like a C+. If you spent your first few turns removing and countering things, then you probably have a cushy enough life total that you'll be okay casting this. So it might be a C+ there. In a more aggressive deck where you're probably trading back and forth life totals, I think this goes down a bit. Life gain deck, maybe it goes up a bit. So I don't know. Let's keep this at a C+, but I think there are going to be decks that don't terribly want this, and there are unfortunately going to be situations where this card's just dead. And unfortunately, that alternate win condition just ain't going to happen. So C+ for Liliana's contract. Up next is Macabre Waltz with the great Liliana art. I actually really like this Liliana art. It grew on me. When I first saw it, I wasn't a big fan. Her chin looked a little bit weird, but I do like it now. 1 and a black for a sorcery at common. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card. We just talked about Gravedigger and how I'm not super a fan of this effect on a spell. Macabre Waltz is one of the ones I like a little bit more because it is 2 creatures. You do have to discard a card. You can maybe get some value out of that, or maybe it's just a land. I think Macabre Waltz is kind of the sweet spot for this effect. I actually do like this effect on Macabre Waltz. That being said, it's still a C. It's still a very late pick, and I do still cut it if I have better cards. So C for Macabre Waltz. Up next is Mind Rot. Mind Rot is 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. Target player discards 2 cards. Obviously, if you found yourself with multiple Fell Spectres or something else that's going to really pay you off for making your opponent discard cards, Mind Rot is maybe a card that is okay, maybe a little. It's much more playable in Sealed, which is just slower. Your opponent's not going to be dropping 2 or 3 2-drops quickly. They're going to have 2 cards usually by the time you play this, and they're apt to be more expensive bombs. That's just how Sealed kind of works out. In Draft, Mind Rot's not quite as good, but I do sometimes put it in here or there. Ultimately, Mind Rot's kind of like a C-. I think you do cut it fairly regularly. There's going to be a couple of decks that'll be okay with it, though. C- for Mind Rot. Up next is Murder. Murder is 1 black for an instant uncommon. Destroy target creature. That's it. Super, super, super good. Murder is an A. It is a first pick in almost every pack. It's got to be a really good bomb rare in that pack for you to not take the Murder. Just a straight A. You're going to kill so many things. It's going to be so good. A for Murder. Up next is Nightmare's Thirst. Nightmare's Thirst is a single black mana for an instant at uncommon. You gain 1 life. Target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gained this turn. So it's at least -1/-1 for 1, which is okay. You know, we've all played Tragic Slip for 1 mana without Morbid before, and it's been okay. But obviously you would like to have gained more life. The trick is, I don't know how reliably you're going to just be able to gain that life. Obviously, if you are in the life gain deck, if you have some life linkers, if you have the Vampire Neonate that we'll talk about in a little bit, if you have repeatable ways of gaining life, maybe you can make this -2/-2. -3/-3 honestly sounds like a bit of a pipe dream. So I don't know about Nightmare's Thirst. I think I'm going to have to keep an eye on it. I think you probably always play the first one just because you'll get to kill random X1s for sure. And then if you are in the life gain deck, you can probably bump this up a little bit higher. So I'm going to put Nightmare's Thirst at like a C+, I think. And in the right deck, it goes up probably a little bit more. I'm just not a big fan of my removal requiring other cards to be good. So C+ for Nightmare's Thirst. Up next is Open the Graves. Open the Graves is 3 black for an enchantment at rare. Whenever a non-token creature dies, you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. This, I think, is a trap. I don't think it's actually good. It's a 5 mana do-nothing enchantment. Doesn't do anything. When you play this, doesn't do anything. Doesn't do anything next turn, or the next turn, or the next turn, unless a creature has died. It's a nice effect to have. If I could start the game with this effect in play, of course. It's fantastic. The fact that I have to pay a card for this, the fact that it costs 5 mana, I'm not a super big fan of it. It does not help you when you're ahead. It doesn't really help you when you're behind. It certainly doesn't help you in a board stall because things aren't dying at all. So when is this ever actually helpful? Very specifically, it would make your opponent not want to wrath the board. There's only 1 wrath in the set. I don't think I'm touching Open the Graves. I think it's actually an F. I really, really don't think it's any good. It doesn't do enough quickly enough, and the thing that it does is relatively mediocre. So F for Open the Graves. Up next is Phylactery Lich. Phylactery Lich is black, black, black for a creature zombie at rare. It's a 5/5 indestructible for 3. However, as Phylactery Lich enters the battlefield, put a Phylactery counter on an artifact you control. When you control no permanents with Phylactery counters on them, sacrifice Phylactery Lich. So you cannot cast this. Well, you can. Without an artifact on the battlefield, you can cast it, but it will instantly die. So, I have played with this before, but for newer players, you can kind of compare this to Zahid from Dominaria. You take off a toughness, you lose the flying, and it costs 1 less mana than tapping an artifact. But Zahid, you could just cast if you didn't have artifacts. Phylactery Lich, you absolutely cannot. It'll just die. So, last time this came around, it was super swingy. You had to play artifacts that weren't necessarily good. You had to draw them to get this out. Now, when it comes down on turn 3, as we saw at the pre-release on Friday, it can do a lot of work. But things have to kind of work out for you in order for this to actually be good. Competitively, I think Phylactery Lich is probably like a C-. I don't think I terribly want to play this if I'm really serious about winning. But if you want to go for that long shot, you can play a few crappy artifacts and maybe hope that you get yourself a turn 3 indestructible Phylactery Lich. Now again, black, black, black means that you really need to be heavily into black. Think about Dreadshade, think about all the triple color costing creatures we saw in Dominaria, and remember how frequently you didn't get them out on turn 3. So ultimately, I don't think Phylactery Lich is a competitive, consistent pick. I've got it at like a C-, but it is obviously a swingy pick. If you pull it off, you're going to do some serious work with it. That's just not how I like to play Magic, though. So C- for Phylactery Lich. Yes, you will lose some games to this quite a bit, and if you do want to go high variance, this is the card for you. Up next is the Black Horse, Plaguemare. Plaguemare is 1 black black for a creature Nightmare Horse at uncommon. It's a 2/2. It can't be blocked by white creatures, and when it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn. Plaguemare looks great. Looks totally solid. It's a 2/2 for 3, which isn't necessarily the best. You are overpaying a little bit there, but it does have Nausea attached to it. -1/-1. Not even to all creatures, just to your opponent's team, is pretty solid. This will kill Thopters, and this will kill Pikers and a whole bunch of X1s. Perhaps after combat, where you dealt a bit of damage, maybe it'll even kill 2/2s or 3/3s. And, randomly, if you're against white, you've got yourself an unblockable 2/2. I think this is totally solid. I think you play this in every single black deck. I've got it at a C+, and in those white matchups, it's going to play even better. So C+ for Plaguemare. Up next is Ravenous Harpy. Ravenous Harpy is 2 and a black for a creature Harpy at uncommon. It's a 1/2 with flying, and pay 1 generic mana and sacrifice another creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on Ravenous Harpy. So this is a huge include for the black-red sack deck. Stealing a creature, spending 1 mana to kill it, and making your Harpy bigger is great. Sacking your own outclassed creatures, your 1/1 goblins that were great on turn 1 and 2, but aren't great on turn 6, to get a counter on a flyer is going to be really good. I'd be happy to take this as a first step into the sacrifice deck, especially as most other players will have no interest in the active treasons and such at the table. A solid B in those decks. In other decks, it drops lower to like a C+. I think you still play it in a lot of black decks because you're going to have creatures that get outclassed, and a flyer that becomes a 2/3 or a 3/4 will be pretty darn solid. I think it just really shines in the black-red sack deck. So B in that deck, C+ in most other black decks. Maybe not in a heavy black control deck. Up next is Reassembling Skeleton. He's back yet again. 1 and a black for a creature Skeleton Warrior at uncommon. It's a 1/1. Pay 1 and a black, return Reassembling Skeleton from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This thing blocks forever. Can be super obnoxious. It takes up 2 of your mana to be an infinite chump blocker. So as long as Trample's not in play, or flying, this is just going to be super annoying. In addition, you could just sack this to the Ravenous Harpy over and over and over. I'm not sure what nutrition that Harpy is getting from a pile of bones, but it'll work. This has combos. It combos with Mentor of the Meek. We saw that at the pre-release. Just Reassembling Skeleton is really, really, really decent with other cards. All of that being said, it's not a super high pick, because blocking forever is not a way to win Magic. You got to keep that in mind. This needs to be part of another deck. There needs to be more going on. So ultimately, I'm not going to go any higher than a C+ on Reassembling Skeleton. I'd prefer to pick this in the middle of the mid pack. But to contradict that statement, I'd like to have one in almost every black deck. The best thing I can say is give this creature a try. You will find so many things that you can do with this that are really, really good, because it's so cheap to just bring it back over and over and over. And if I can get this with the Harpy, I'm going to be really, really, really happy. So C+ for Reassembling Skeleton, but give this thing a try if you've never played it before. Up next is Rise from the Grave. Rise from the Grave is 4 and a black for a sorcery and uncommon. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. This is surprisingly okay. I've already talked about how graveyard to battlefield is something I really like. This is any graveyard to battlefield, which means you can kill your opponent's bomb and bring their bomb back. So this can be fairly powerful. It is expensive. It is 5 mana. And if you are taking an opponent's creatures, it's almost like a mind control, except that creature did have to die first. And ultimately, I think this will kind of depend on how fast the format is. If it's really fast, 5 mana, and you have had to have killed a creature or lost a creature that you're happy getting back for 5 mana, might not happen. If it's slow enough, this is probably just solid. So this will be kind of like a C+, B-, depending, I think, on the speed of the format. Let's go with B-. Let's be optimistic that we'll continue having slightly slower formats. Up next is Skeleton Archer. Skeleton Archer is 3 black for a creature Skeleton Archer at common. It's a 3/3. When Skeleton Archer enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. It's a hill giant that pings anything. That's totally and utterly fine. It's not amazing. It's not a high pick, but I'd probably play most copies of it that I can get in all black decks. Just being able to kill 2/1s or 3/1s, being able to hit my opponent for 1, and then have a 3/3 that attacks fairly well and blocks fairly well. Skeleton Archer just seems totally solid. C+, gimme all of them. Up next is Skymarch Bloodletter. Skymarch Bloodletter is 2 and a black for a creature Vampire Soldier at common. It's a 2/2 with flying. When Skymarch Bloodletter enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Bloodletter's great. We know this from Ixalan. Bloodletter's great even without tribal support. We know that from Ixalan. A 2/2 flyer for 3 is playable, and the life drain makes it even better. It's a very high black pick, though never really a first pick, I don't think. I think it's an easy B-. I think you'll play every single copy you can get your hands on of this, and I think you want to get your hands on every single copy of it. So it's definitely kind of a step above the C+ grade. If you are in the life gain deck, here's your life gain, but I think every black deck is going to want this, so I don't think you're just going to get these guaranteed if you are in that black-white life gain deck. So B- for Skymarch Bloodletter. Up next is Sovereign's Bite. Sovereign's Bite is 1 and a black for a sorcery at common. Target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Not for me. Someone somewhere will die to this. Someone somewhere will have 7 of these cast against them, and that's gonna suck. But that's not gonna be me doing it. You probably should just never play this. It's really bad. It's good in exactly one single situation, which is your opponent's at 3 or less life, in which case a million other cards would be also good in that situation. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this. Even in the life gain deck, I don't want to play a card that literally just gains me life and drains 3. It doesn't do enough. It doesn't do enough. So I've got Sovereign's Bite at an F. Even in the black-white life gain deck, I don't think you want this. So F for Sovereign's Bite. Up next is Stitcher's Supplier. Stitcher's Supplier is a single black mana for a creature zombie at uncommon. It's a 1/1. When Stitcher's Supplier enters the battlefield or dies, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. If you're looking to reanimate with Rise from the Grave, or maybe make some zombie tokens with Graveyard Marshal, or otherwise play around with your graveyard somehow, here you go. This is one of the single most efficient ways of filling a graveyard I think we've seen in a while. I think this could actually see some constructed play because of how efficient it is. Now, obviously, you must be in that deck. You probably must have a Liliana, I would almost think. Otherwise, this card is complete garbage. In the exact right deck, which I'm not 100% sure exists, I think you have to have that Liliana, maybe an Isareth, maybe a Graveyard Marshal. I think this could be a B-, but I think in a lot of decks, this is just going to be an F. There's not quite enough ways of supporting the kind of Graveyard Matters deck in this format, so be very careful with this. Yeah, it feels like there's a really good constructed deck coming out of a lot of these cards. I don't think it really translates to limited, though. Up next is Strangling Spores. Strangling Spores is 3 and a black for an instant at common. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. It's great. It's good. It's solid. It's 4 mana for instant speed, kill a fair number of things, and after combat, kill a larger number of things. Yeah, this is a first pack in some picks, I think. The pack would need to be a little bit weak, but at common, I'm pretty happy to see this, and I'm probably pretty happy to play always the first one, probably the second one, maybe the third one. It's obviously not Eviscerate, but it's still pretty good. I've got Strangling Spores at a solid B. Up next is Two-Headed Zombie. Two-Headed Zombie is 3 and a black for a 4/2 creature zombie at common with Menace. I don't like 4/2s for 4. We talk about that quite a bit. Giving it Menace makes it a little bit better. It doesn't die to 1/2 drop. It still dies to a shock, though. Still dies to a lot of removal that deals 2 damage or deals -2/-2. So I'm not super sold on Two-Headed Zombie. The Menace does make this slightly better. It makes it a little bit more likely that it's going to hit once, maybe. So I think we can put this at a C, whereas I would typically want a 4/2 for 4 at a C- or a D. So yeah, let's keep Two-Headed Zombie at a C. Menace maybe will make these stats a little bit better. Up next is Vampire Neonate. Vampire Neonate is a single black mana for an 0/3 creature vampire. At common, pay 2 generic mana, tap it. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So here's some repeatable life gain. This is what the Life Gain Matters deck wants. If you have an Epicure of whatever it was, Blood? Probably Blood. Yeah, Epicure of Blood. Then Vampire Neonate's going to be great. This you pay 2, you tap, and you drain for 2. This is just a card that I think has some really good use. Even in like the blue-black control deck, this is some inevitability. If you're removing creatures and countering creatures and they're not attacking you, you can just keep pinging them each turn. It's like a prodigal sorcerer, kind of, except not nearly as good. Yeah, Vampire Neonate, I think, is fine in some decks. You do have to build with it in mind. If you're playing, black-red, sack stuff, kill stuff, you maybe don't want a Vampire Neonate. Even there, I could kind of see it being okay, because you could sack the Neonate if need be. But I don't think this is a super high pick. I think this is like a C, and in certain decks, it maybe goes upwards of a C+. So, C++ for Vampire Neonate. Our second last card is Vampire Sovereign. Vampire Sovereign is 3 black for a creature vampire at uncommon. It's a 3/4 with flying. It's standing on a throne, or I guess levitating mere inches above that throne, but it has flying. When Vampire Sovereign enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 3 life, and you gain 3 life. It's a 3/4 flyer for 5, which is a little bit under rate from some other flyers that we've seen in the set, but is still totally fine. And then draining 3? That's really, really good. This is just like kind of a beefed up Skymarch Bloodletter, and I'm going to be very happy to have one of these, or 2 of these even. 3 might be a little bit much, depending on what my curve looks like, or my ramp ability, but this is a strong pick here. I think it's even a first pick in some packs that are lacking removal or a real bomb. Yeah, Vampire Sovereign looks great. I've got it at just a solid B. And our final card for black, I think the set review's gone a little bit longer just because there's been a lot to talk about in black, is Walking Corpse. Walking Corpse is 1 and a black for a creature zombie at common. It's a 2/2 with nothing else. It is a bear. So history lesson time. Remember how in the last set review for Dominaria, I started to get really kind of sad about how 2/2s for 2 were getting outclassed. They were almost unplayable if they didn't do something as well. And the reason I was sad was because Walking Corpse here was amazing in Innistrad. It was a huge deal that black got a 2/2 for 2 with no downside attached to it. Black just didn't get that, nor did red. And of course red now gets that as well, plus upsides. The other colors would get 2/2s for 2, and if they were lucky, and if it was a rare, it might do something as well and not have a downside. Well, I think core sets are going to be pretty friendly to our friend Walking Corpse here, so I am going to keep it as a C. It's a bear, that's the bear grade. Unfortunately, we're not cheering about it existing anymore. There are still 2-drops that just outclass this in this format, but not quite as many as Dominaria had, so C for Walking Corpse. So that's going to wrap it up for black. Black looks interesting. We've got A's, we've got A minuses, we've got F's, we've got F minuses. We have what I think is the first unplayable except in a specific deck Planeswalker in Limited. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with black. I think it's going to be very swingy. I think sealed is going to be a very, very bad place for black, because you're going to get just a random assortment of these A's or F's. Draft, hopefully you can draft around it a little bit better. So let me know what you're excited about in black. Let me know what you think I'm wrong about. I gave a lot of F's. I'm sure there's going to be mad people in the comments. Let me know. Discuss with me. Discuss with each other down below. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at facebook.com/themanaleek, twitch.tv/themanaleek, and patreon.com/themanaleek. If you like the content, click that thumbs up button. Click subscribe if you want to see more. And if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow for the red set review.